The British Council office in Kyiv, its walls intended to house language classes and cultural exchanges, is reduced to a rubble by a Russian missile. A guard lies injured, the glass lies shattered, and yet in Moscow this is presented as a triumph. Why? Because Vladimir Putin cannot comprehend that culture, education, or civic institutions can exist apart from the state's vertical grip on power. It wouldn't in Russia, so he projects and suggests it wouldn't elsewhere. This was not collateral damage. The CCTV footage makes it clear. 2 missiles 20 seconds apart, striking the British Council and the EU delegation buildings deliberately. In Putin's worldview, every civic body is an arm of government. Courts, the Olympics, even Sputnik, the space agency, are extensions of Kremlin control, as he personally explained to a journalist a few months ago. By that measure, he assumes that Britain or America must treat cultural organisations like the British Council as fronts for military intelligence. The Russian military doctrine of total state power, this vertical structure, admits no grey space between civil and military, thus civic centres become fair game. So Putin once told this journalist, almost out of childish candour, everything is about my power. That line should be inscribed on every Russian missile casing. His concept of vertikal vlasti, the vertical of power, insists that the state monopolises not only politics but art, sport, science and religion. In this sense, hitting the British Council was for him a strike at the British state. And contrast that with Britain or the United States. However flawed, they would not target a Russian cultural institute or a ballet troupe abroad. To do so would be absurd, unlawful and counterproductive. And the set of hurdles that a bombing plan would go through would erase that bias, that absurdity before it even got to that point. That doesn't exist in the Russian calculation. What Russia is doing here is not a military strategy in the conventional sense, it's coercive signalling. By striking US-funded media offices, Turkish drone factories, and the British Council, Moscow sends a message: your soft power, your industries, your diplomacy, they're all vulnerable. And this is the rhetoric of compellence, an attempt to force the West to limit support for Ukraine by manufacturing a fear of escalation. Yet the irony is stark. Every strike on civilian or cultural targets only deepens Western resolve, precisely because it exposes the dishonesty of Russian claims that they only target military infrastructure. When yesterday, I think 21 civilians died in Kyiv. This brings us to the great doublespeak of what might be called MIC, Moscow Information Complex. It insists that the British Council is a spy hub, the EU offices are command centres, Ukrainian postal depots and apartment blocks are legitimate targets. This rhetoric plays well on Russian state television, but it collapses outside the Kremlin echo chamber. It sabotages any claim that Russia is serious about peace. The Prime Minister, Keir Starmer, condemned the strike bluntly. Putin is killing children and civilians and sabotaging hopes of peace. Ursula von der Leyen spoke of terror and barbarism. Zelensky called it the clearest proof yet that Russia chooses ballistics instead of the negotiating table. Even Donald Trump's envoy Keith Kellogg admitted that such egregious attacks threaten this peace. His president claims that he is pursuing peace, but it clearly is not demonstrated in the bombing tactics. That is a measure of how counterproductive Putin's coercive signalling has become, alienating even those inclined to give him the benefit of the doubt. And this strike is more than another crime scene. It symbolises the gulf between two visions of power. Russia's, in which every civic institution is militarised propaganda and therefore vulnerable, and the West's, where civic institutions like the British Council are precisely valuable because they stand outside the state's coercive arm. If Putin cannot comprehend that distinction, he cannot comprehend diplomacy. And that's not so surprising, because if he lives at all, then he lives in a bubble, and has lived in a bubble since almost the beginning, since the point when he stole his first million and sent a message around to all the Secret Service to ask how should he best invest that million. He doesn't need it. It's a game. It's a game, as much as rearranging the articles in the fridge as he reclines in his freezer. But if he cannot comprehend diplomacy, then every peace talk, every summit from Anchorage to Ankara will be sabotaged by the same missiles that fall on Kyiv schools, apartments, and yes, cultural centres. It doesn't matter if you call the ambassador. What can the ambassador do except for smirk and say "duh" every so often? The British Council once taught Shakespeare in Kyiv. Now its walls are torn open by Russian ordnance. But the irony is cruel. In trying to extinguish culture, Russia has only illuminated its own brutality. As Starmer put it, this bloodshed must end. But until it does, we should see in every broken window of the British Council not merely destruction, but proof of why Ukraine, and the civic idea of civilization itself, must endure.